Dear students, good morning. Let us resume back our video lectures on machine learning for image processing. Let us continue our discussion on neural networks more specifically. Let me share the screen. In the previous video lecture, we have discussed about the overview of neural networks, backpropagation in neural networks, and learning of neural networks. Also, some practical aspects of designing neural networks. In this lecture, let us continue on discussion with few more practical aspects of implementing neural networks or designing neural networks for real scenarios or some different data scenarios. We have seen in the previous discussion that we usually divide the data set into training, test, and validation. And we train the data with training data set. And while training, we keep testing on the unseen validation data set. And the model that is giving the minimum error on the unseen validation data set is considered as the final model. And that is recommended model for testing in new unknown scenarios by for the neural network. And that is when evaluated on a new unseen data, on a typical new unseen data, you can see the loss that is reasonably minimum at close to the validation minimum data, like wherever it has the minimum for the validation data. Okay, so and the convergence for the training of neural networks is usually based on when the error doesn't change, as you can see here, the loss doesn't change, or when the gradients doesn't change, in the sense that weights doesn't update from iteration to iteration. The overall weight update is close to zero. That means slopes are close to zero at each weight elements. Okay, or the error itself is lesser than some quantity. Okay, and or hardly we can put a limit on the number of iterations or thresholds. Few other aspects of training are on how do we design a neural network. As we discussed in the earlier discussion, the number of input neurons are equal to the number of features in the data set, and number of output neurons are decided by the number of classes in the data set, while the number of hidden neurons are decided by the complexity of the decision boundary we would like to come up with. In the sense that, see, each of the neuron adds a nonlinearity because it has an activation function with nonlinear activation function, or it has an activation function introducing nonlinearity. So if we want a complex nonlinear decision boundary, we need more hidden neurons to add, each contributing to individual nonlinear, small nonlinearity in the decision boundary. Or if we need a simple decision boundary, then probably even a single hidden neuron or a couple of hidden neurons may be good enough. Okay, so we will see this with more examples in the later slides. See, as you can see here, if the decision boundary is very simple, linearly separable, then even a single hidden neuron will be good enough. In fact, even a single neuron would be able to do it. But however, if the decision boundary is like this, where the samples are not linearly separable, we need to have a decision boundary. Okay, up to here, ranging that it is R1. And then again from here to here, it is R1. And rest is R2. So this is not a simple decision boundary, or it's a more complex decision boundary. To make this kind of decisions, we need more hidden neurons to be added, right? That you can see probably in the later slides. As you can see, single neuron will give us a linear decision boundary. And if you now add more and more hidden neurons, as you can see here, okay, we can have a as complex decision boundary as shown here. Okay, wherein the R1 is within the R2 region again, and R2 is within the R1 region. So you can have reasonably complex decision boundary if you have more number of hidden neurons. Because as you know, each of the hidden neuron introduces a nonlinearity. So this output function now, z, whatever you are getting here, output variable, okay, so this zk is f2 of, okay, W transpose f1 of W transpose x plus b. Okay, so here this is wji and this is wkc. As you can see here, it is more and more nonlinear if we keep increasing the number of hidden neurons, right? And this f1, f2 are both nonlinear functions. Activation are nonlinear functions. Okay. See, the problem, if we keep on increasing the hidden neurons, is that we may end up with coming out with a even more complex decision boundary than what is required. In the initial discussions, okay, when we have some set of samples like this, we were discussing about which is more generic decision boundary. Okay, so the suggestions for decision boundary can be this one or this one or even few others. But between 1 and 2, if someone asks which is a good decision boundary, we have discussed in the initial classes that 1 is more wishful decision boundary than 2. The reason being, the decision boundary 2 is more tailored to the given training data. Now, given the each hidden neuron introduces a nonlinearity, can you guess the decision boundary that may be obtained by 2 versus 1, in which case the number of hidden neurons will be more? The number of hidden neurons expected to be more in this compared to in 2 compared to 1. So more number of hidden neurons will come up with even more complex decision boundary. So it's not necessary to have more and more hidden neurons and come up with more and more complex decision boundaries. However, for the problem at hand, for the samples at hand, or the data to be classified at hand, we need to come up with a generic decision boundary, but at the same time, it may sometimes may be necessary to be nonlinear. So there is a compromise on the ability to classify the samples and at the same time not to too much overfit to the samples. In other words, we need the decision boundary which is generic enough to classify the samples, even maybe being nonlinear, but it should not be so complex that it works only for the data set we train with. So there is a compromise on the hidden neurons that we usually design in a neural while designing the neural networks. And this problem is referred to as overfitting. As you can see here, the same is shown here. Decision boundary 1 here. Decision boundary, if you consider this is 1 and this is 2. Okay, 2 is more generic decision boundaries than 1. And the number of hidden neurons required will be more if you want to come up with a decision boundary of 1 compared to 2 here. As we discussed, if we increase the number of hidden neurons in a neural network, we keep on coming up with more and more complex decision boundaries. But if we have a design of neural network wherein we don't know a priori how many hidden neurons are to be placed. In fact, in most of the real scenarios, we'll have input features or input samples, and we will have the output classes or the output labels with us. But we will not know anything about the number of neurons required in the hidden layer, especially to come up with a proper classification in a neural network based classification framework. So what we wish to have is, we initially tend to try with reasonably good number of neurons in the hidden layer. But however, we want to see how many neurons are needed to be active to make them to participate in coming up with the generic but highly accurate decision boundary. So for that, what we need to see is, even though the links are there between each neuron to the subsequent neurons in the subsequent layer, we need to see which links are to be active and which links are not necessarily to be active. So for that, what we usually do is to see that the links where WKJ or WJI are not very important has to be died down naturally, in the sense that the weight elements WKI for a particular branch has to die down naturally, in the sense that what we do, if that's not very important in through gradient update, we should make them 0 for subsequent updates, or it should not unnecessarily look hanging with a small non-zero value. So to do towards that, what we do is heuristic weight update. Usually, if you see the weight update equation, what we have, WT, here WM is written. So WT, how do we do in weight update of a neural network? WT plus 1 is equal to WT minus eta times dose A by dou WT. See, the weight update becomes non-zero or keeps increasing if that weight is contributing to the minimization of the cost function. Okay, so this is the term which will decide how much weight has to be adjusted, or how much influence the weight makes on the minimizing of the cost function. If this is small, very small, and if the weight is also very small, it means that this is not really, this weight is slightly non-zero, but it may not be very contributing to the minimization of the cost function. Insignificant. In that case, we should have a natural phenomena or natural process to make this even smaller or die down, to make its influence completely 0 in design of the neural network, rather than moving the decision boundary on a heuristic or a noisy basis. That is usually done by heuristic weight update, wherein what we do is, each weight vector is updated by a small fraction of the previous weight, in the sense that if epsilon is to be 0.99, if WT itself is small, then WT plus 1, if I update by 0.99 times the WT plus 1 at each of the weight update, then what does it happen? If this itself is insignificant or small, then if I update by a small fraction that is slightly lesser than 1, it tends to become 0 completely over time. Because over time, if I make 3 iterations wherein these all roughly constant, not changing, because of what? Because the error is not being influenced by this weight element or weight WT, and hence this doesn't change. And which is being active? Only this way heuristic weight update becomes active in such cases, and then subsequently that corresponding weight will become is equal to 0, right? So this may happen for a particular weight vector we are in hand. So I will write here Kj. Okay, it can happen for Kj or Ji. Okay, for anyone, but for a particular Kj we are doing this, right? So that weight alone will go to 0. What happens to the other weight elements? They will not go to 0 because they keep changed by the slope contribution or the slope element, because Dou A by dou W, if it is non-zero, then they will have a significant updates in subsequent iterations. And hence they gets more driven by the real and the important update of the cost function. Okay, whichever are not being influenced by the cost function, or whichever are not being attached to the cost function, or not making contributions in the cost, slope of the cost function, those weights only will be died down by heuristic weight update. The other very important term that is added to the weight update is the momentum term. See, what usually happens in updating the weights of a neural network is, as we discussed, the W, say J of W, is function of all W's, and these W's include WKI, WKJ, and WJI. And these all put together is roughly, as for the example we have discussed, close to 51,000. Okay, so in 51,000 dimensional space, the cost function will be, most of the times it may be smooth, and only at some regions it will be having valleys and peaks or variations. And hence the cost function, most of the times what may happen is the slope of the cost function may tend to zero. So in such cases, what may happen is the neural network update may stuck at a local minima. Just to give an example, let us consider one-dimensional cost function to understand it easier. Okay, assume that we have a one-dimensional cost function of this sort. Okay, so assume that I started from here. We started from here. Then what shall happen? It reaches here, and here is a local minima. Because of this local minima, what happens? Dou A by dou W is 0, and then weight update doesn't update. But where is the global minima? Global minima can be seen here. This is global minima. We wish to reach out to the global minima. So assume that for a hypothetical discussion, let us make this not too much variations. Okay, let us make this little simpler case. Now to reach out to the global minima. In all cases, we may or may not reach to the global minima, but let us make a simpler case. Okay, let this be the case where this is the global minima. Okay, so now we are here. See, this momentum term, whichever we are introducing here, what it does is, it tries, whenever we reach out to a local minima, it helps us to move in the direction in which we have been moving, because this may or may not be a settling point for the overall weight update. Okay, global minima is the overall settling point we can consider. It may be, usually it is attributed to a minima that is between two big peaks. Okay, a valley that is between two peaks. Okay, so if we are here now, if we make a weight update, okay, this will make only 0 update, because dou A by dou W is 0 at this location. This let us be in location 1 now. See, as we discussed, we alpha times we move in the direction in which we have been moving. That is, see, WT minus 1 may be the previous location wherein we were. So if you consider here, the previous location is here. So we were moving in this direction. So we will move further in that direction. So WT plus 1 now will come here. This is the next move. Then subsequently, I may be able to move again in the same direction. So this may be my next move. Okay. This may be our next move. And since now we reached here, on the cost function. Okay, so we will be, this is the first move, this is the next move, this is the third move. Okay, so and here we, anyway, the gradient again is non-zero and helps us to reach to again local minima. Again the momentum term helps here and so on, and we will be able to reach the global minima finally. Okay, we will be able to reach this point, right? So adding a momentum term that is moving in the same direction in which we were moving before helps us to move or reach out to the global minima in most of the cases, or in reasonably good number of cases, when the cost function has many local minimas. Okay, and small local minimas, in the sense that, see, if there is a local minima of very high peak just after the minima, we may not be able to reach, like cross the peak, because the momentum term may not be enough to move, to pass against the peak, because it will throw out the negative gradients. Okay, so if you have a scenario like we have just plotted before, okay, if we are here, then we may struck up with the local minima and we will not be able to move away from the local minima. If we are here, we may struck up here and we may not be able to move because the positive gradient here is high, and then this will move, this term dominates the momentum term. Okay, and hence you will not be able to move out of this peak to reach out to this global minima. But in situations where the peaks are smaller and the momentum term is substantially good enough or makes equal contribution or better contribution than the gradient term, you will be able to move it. Okay, so in that sense, this will help to go against the, can also help to go against the slope term in some regions to reach out to the global minima. Okay, but however, as you see here, if we reach out here, then the slope term is dominating, and hence it will help us to move in this direction rather than to this positive direction. Once we move in negative direction, even the momentum term also becomes negative, and you will not be able to reach out to the other global minima, but you will reach back to the local minima. Okay, so in cases where the peak is of high height, you will reach back to the local minima due to momentum term and the gradients together. But in the case of where the peaks are very small, compare, and we are stuck at local minima, momentum term helps us to reach out to the global minima. And this is one of the very important term that is usually used in all neural networks implementations or learning. Since we are taking the move in the same direction as that of the previous directions, it will help us to smoothly also to converge to the local or global minima, converge in neural networks. Another very important aspect that is important while design of a neural network is how do we present the input to a neural network. Assume that we have a neural network here. Okay, so this neural network, this is other representation of neural network where we have W1 vector, W1 is WKJs. I will write here for WJIs. I will write here in this way, but later we can also write W1 or something like that. WKJs and W2. Okay, the whole W matrix. And this is Xi. How we present inputs also matters in the sense that, see, for example, if I'm doing fish classification problem, wherein the fish intensities is one feature and the other feature is length of fish. See, the intensities range from 0 to 255, as you know. The lengths may range from 5 to 15 centimeter, assume that. See, there is a big difference between the range of the x1 and x2. Okay, and instead of length, if I measure width, it may be even smaller. Now some 1 to 8 centimeters or 5 centimeters. In that case, one feature value x1 may be very small or very high, x2 may be very small, the dynamic range. Due to that, what happens? The weights connecting to x2 may get more influenced, x1 may get less influenced. Okay, and that creates imbalance in the training and design of neural network. And hence, before presenting all the inputs to a neural network, what we usually do is normalizing the input features. That means each of the input features x1 to xd are usually brought to same range. So they are all normalized and brought to the same range. How should we normalize them? One procedure, simpler procedure is we can find out the minimum and maximum, okay, and then divide by the maximum minus minimum and subtract the minimum from each of the feature. So that's one simple normalization, scaling to a common range. Other way of normalizing is apply them map them to unit normal distribution. That means make their variances 1 and then the mean equal to 0. Demean them. Okay, so it since demean, normalize. Okay, this is the other way. Right? Usually it is necessary so that each of the input features have the same range and hence they equally gets weighted, and the weight initialization also now can be taken care appropriately in the same uniform range. And the convergence also now becomes more uniform. Now the next question is, how do we initialize the weights? See, the weight initialization plays an important role as I discussed before. And weight initialization usually done through random variables. Since we need the weights both from positive and negative sides, we initialize the weights from -1 to +1 or from random numbers having both positive and negative. And both positive and negative weights are required because if you see yj or what net value at a hidden neuron, we have these weights acting as excitatory or inhibitory. So excitatory means these weights in neural network or neurons should act in accordance with the input or give more importance to the input decision. Inhibitory means sometimes some of the neuron inputs may need to not to be considered or to be considered in with opposite sign or to be inhibited. So in such cases, we need WJI from both positive and negative side. Ideally, we can simply think of -1 to 1 range, or even the better way to do it is, instead of putting WJIs in -1 to 1 range, we would like to put the net values from coming out from this WJI initialization to be -1 to 1 range. If net j has to be from -1 to one range, it means that the wji into xi has to be in -1 to 1 range. With a small mathematical derivations, you can see that wji, for this to put in this range where I equal to 1 to d, wj's are to be initialized from -1 by root d to 1 by root d. Using some little bit of statistical analysis, we can show that wji's has to be in the range -1 by root d to 1 by root d if we are summing over 1 to d. For this term wj, that means if d weight elements are involved, each of the weight element has to be initialized between -1 by root d to 1 by root d. And this initialization can be through uniform random variables or Gaussian random variables. Okay, so this is referred to as Xaver initialization. There are several methods that are usually suggested for initializing the neural networks, and this is one of the very widely used way of initializing the weight elements. As you can see here, this is the range in which we initialize the weight, each of the weight element. In the hidden neurons, if what is the range we suggest for initialization is -1 by root nh to 1 by root nh, because we need net k to be in the range -1 to 1. For this to happen, wkj yj summation over j equal to 1 to nh is -1 to 1, and this requires wkj's to be initialized -1 by root nh to 1 by root nh. Okay, so please note that we have the weights with both positive and negative sign. Initialization, as I said, plays an important role in convergence of the neural network. Other important aspect in design of neural networks and based on the data is that we need at least 10 times the more number of training samples than the total number of weights that are there in a neural network. The number of weight elements in the neural network are referred to as expressive power of a neural network. So compared to this, at least 5 to 10 times the number of samples are expected to train a neural network. If we don't appropriately initialize, the consequence is that the neural network may not converge to a reasonable local minima or a global minima, and hence it may converge at quite different location or suboptimal local minima than what it can converge to a better region in cost space. And hence this plays an important role. The final thing that we discuss is how we present the data samples to a neural network. See, assume that we have a neural network. As we mentioned, this is one easy way of representing a neural network. W1, input to hidden neurons, W2. And we will give here X1, XD, this is XK, kth sample. Okay, and then we have the labels ZK, Z1 to ZD, ZC, and Z of kth sample. Okay, and then we have the target values or desired values to find out cost. In the data set we may have actually large number of samples. How we present the data samples to the neural network also makes an important contribution in the convergence of the neural network, overall convergence of the neural network. As we discussed so far, the weight update at each element or the neural network is done for each given sample. Okay, so we are getting a weight update for each given sample, right? Now the question is, how should we present the sample? Should we present one after the other first, okay, and then first, second, and so on up to, we should go up to n, and then should we come back and present the samples, or randomly pick some sample and present it, randomly pick another sample and present it, and randomly pick the third sample, present it, randomly pick the fourth sample, present it. Okay, so this is randomly presenting input samples for weight updates. Okay, this is referred to as stochastic backpropagation. Okay, so if we present randomly, we can throw a random number between uniform random number between 1 to n, and we can take up a sample and present it to the neural network. How many times do we do it? We do till the convergence of a neural network. Okay, and a sample may repeat in this process for more number of times than other sample. Similarly, for each of the sample we present, we make a delta k, and then we update the weights of neural network at that time instant itself. In this case now, each delta w k is updated, okay, at that instant itself. The other kind of update usually we do or suggested is batch backpropagation or batch update. In which case, we keep presenting first sample, second sample up to n sample. We accumulate delta W1, delta W2, delta W3, and so on for each sample. And then after accumulating all of them for delta Wn n samples, we update the weights only once. Okay, so this is referred to as batch update. In the earlier case, what we do is we update here Wt plus 1 is equal to Wt minus eta times delta W k at that instant itself for the kth sample. Okay, and then we keep updating for every sample individually. Whereas here we update in a batch mode. Okay, and this batch backpropagation needs all the samples to be presented to make a single update. Whereas the stochastic backpropagation updates for each of the randomly picked samples. So these are the two widely suggested procedures for training. However, now what is very widely used is stochastic backpropagation with small batches, mini batch backpropagation. That means we may pick 10 random samples or some 10 samples and present it and update. Another 10 random at another location we may pick random location, we may pick 10 samples and then update them in a batch mode. Another 10 samples from other location we may pick and update them in a batch mode. Okay, this is referred to as mini batch update. Both put together in some sense, what we have now is mini batch update. What is usually suggested is that the stochastic backpropagation converges quite reasonably faster than the backpropagation. You can see the specific details of this here more in the slides. Usually training the neural networks is also done through cross-validation. Cross-validation means if we have a data set of 100 samples, sample 1 to sample 100, we may divide this data set. Let me this data set into 4 folds or 5 folds. Each of the fold now, fold 1 to fold 5. Each of the fold may contain equal number of samples. And now we may at any given time while training, we may give 4 folds to train, and we may use the last other fold, leftover fold, to test. This process continues for changing each fold. Iterates with each different fold in testing. Okay, and this is referred to as cross-validation. As you can see, this process enables us to test with each of the sample at once as the test sample. Right through this procedure. And this will enable us to evaluate the model on each of the sample as being test sample and reasonably gives a high accuracy while training the overall network. And more generic solution to the classification or decision boundaries. Here you can see some of the examples of the classification. See, as we have seen this is XR problem wherein these two samples belongs to one class, these two samples belongs to another class. We will see more explicitly here in the training process what's happening and why the neural network, if we have hidden neurons, is able to classify it. See, if we see X1, X2, if you plot them X1, X2 space, you see that samples are not linearly separable. Whereas now, if you plot them in Y1, Y2 space, this is Y1 and this is Y2 space, you can see that the final samples, okay, this sample 1, if we consider sample 2, sample 3 and sample 4, the final samples, if you see, which are sample 1 here, sample 2, sample 3 here, and then sample 4 here. You can see that the final samples are linearly separable in the sense that sample 2, sample 3, sorry. Sample 1, sample 3 came together and sample 2, sample 4 came together, and after training and in Y1, Y2 space, they are linearly separable. As you can see here, the initial samples, if you see, the sample 1 here, okay, and then sample 2 here sample 3 here. Okay, sorry. Not very clear. Sample 3 here, sample 3 here, sample 4 here. Okay, you can see that sample 2 and sample 4 has gone after convergence, closure, and then sample 1, sample 3 can easily be separated by decision boundary. So this what happens in the sense that x1, x2 are not linearly separable, y1, y2 are linearly separable. If you see y1, y2 as features of the same samples, okay, in y1, y2 feature space, they are linearly separable. And hence the neural network is able to do it, or a single neuron at the output layer is able to separate them. Okay, this is what essentially happens in the neural network. That means at the initial layers, these features are if you sketch the samples with these features, the samples are not linearly separable. These features, samples are not linearly separable. Whereas for these features, samples are linearly separable. So essentially, we are trying to find out or come up with better features that can distinguish the class 1 and class 2 samples by the final neuron in after learning. Here is a small application details with an example. So we wanted to classify the handwritten characters, and the character, each of the character is written here, and it may have some standard dimension of 28 cross 28 kind of. Okay, and each of the handwritten characters are taken, and we would like to develop a handwritten characteristics, handwritten recognition system, handwritten characters recognition system. For that, what processes does it involve is we start with scanning and then pre-processing and segmentation, segmenting each of the characters, for subsequently feature extraction and then classification. As you know, if we write some see if we have something like this, what we need to do is initially we need to identify the each or segment each of the individual character in this, right? After we segment each of the character, then what we need to do, we need to pre-process and make them probably to an identical size. After bringing them to an identical size, and we need to extract the features. So this process of segmenting and bringing them to a standard size all comes under pre-processing. Or normalized size. This comes under pre-processing. Once we do that, this pre-processing can be including the segmentation may include pre-processing. Pre-processing may include segmentation as well. So more explicitly, we may first take a paper document and then bring a binary image, grayscale to binary, and segment a single character, and then we come up with the next phase, that is feature extraction. Feature extraction can be identifying where the on pixels and off pixels are there, and binarizing and putting as a vector. Okay, this is one kind of feature extraction. The other kind of feature extractions may be using HOG, histogram of orientation gradients, and so on. Once we get a feature vector, X case, then we will send it to a neural network or classification. Okay, so in many of the practical problems or data sets, we need several of the pre-processing and feature extraction steps involved before we send them to a neural network. Finally, once we get the information through to which class each of the letter is assigned out of the 26 possible classes for characters, then we may again need to see to make a meaning out of it by combining the words or any further post-processing. So these neural networks has applications in many fields, as we discussed before, including economic fields and industrial control and so on. In addition to the field of signal processing, computer vision, speech recognition, and many others. So here are the references for the discussion. Thank you.